Good morning, church. We were expecting Dr. Sven Ostring to be with us today, but God is famous at disappointing people and not meeting their expectations, isn't he? As he arrived to New Zealand on Thursday, he realized that he is terribly sick, developed fever, and cold. We probably need to turn down this one. And before we talk about something that is completely different what people think about when they say Easter, I want to invite here a young person. I thought I say a child, but no, she's not a child anymore. Young person, Angel. Angel, come up please here, because Angel was baptized at this church 2 weeks ago, but last week she was in Christchurch, so she couldn't receive her gift and her certificate, as we always give to everyone who gets baptized in Seventh-day Adventist Church. Angel, that's a special book. We at Royal are famous at giving My Utmost for His Highest away. I had to wait for around 2 months for these books to arrive to New Zealand. You can't find them in the country. So, yeah, Angel, this is a set of devotionals. And as you go through life, you will understand it more and more. Keep reading them over the years, because I keep reading it every day. And for around 10 years plus right now, and every single year, I kind of start getting understanding what the author meant. But then I actually realized that not yet. So I keep doing it again and again. Thank you, Angel. May God bless you, and as you follow Jesus, as per your decision, which you basically shown to everyone by your baptism. Thank you very much, Angel, for your decision. May God bless you. So as I mentioned, Dr. Sven could not be here, so I had to pull out of my sleeve an emergency Easter sermon. Every single pastor should be good enough to pull out an emergency Easter sermon, right? And today we are talking not about the eggs, not about the hot cross buns, not about any other culinary inventions. We're talking about God who raises the dead. Once upon a time, there was a miller who lived in a windmill and ground flour for the village baker. Day after day, the miller used to worry about whether he was producing enough flour. One night, after there has been no wind the entire day, he hit upon a plan. He would disengage the cogs of the windmill and work all night turning the machinery himself by hand. Then he would be sure that there will be enough flour in the morning. When the morning came, there was plenty of flour, but the miller was slumped asleep on the floor, and the flour never got to the baker. So sound asleep was the miller that he never heard the noise outside, the noise of a rushing mighty wind. If you have ears, then hear. So what are the implications of the fact that Jesus rose from the dead on the third day after he was executed? What does the resurrection of Jesus tell us about the true God? What I want to say today divides into the 3 parts: the surprising command, the sudden crisis, and the surpassing God. Let's start with the first. The story is told of Moses coming down from the mountain to report back to the children of Israel, right? You all know this story. So good news and the bad news, he says. The good news is we got them down from 40 to 10. The bad news, adultery is still in. When we think of God giving commandments to people, that's the sort of image we always get, the God like this. God who has all sorts of rather arbitrary rules and want to give us more and more and more of them. Most of them designed, it seems, to stop us doing things we might otherwise like to do. As once a young person told me, the trouble is everything that Jesus is against, I like. Now, why would one invent a God like that? You may say, we didn't invent him, it's just who God is. Or perhaps everyone would incline to see that the critics of the Christianity who say that the church has actually invented God like that to keep people under control. Well, there may be some truth in that, right? People do invent things indeed to keep others under control. I heard once a story of a small boy that was at a rather strict school, and he was asked to write down in order the worst things that humans could do. So he wrote, number 1, murder, number 2, running down the school corridor. We all get things out of proportion often. But this concept of God that gives rules and wants us to follow these rules strictly, in fact, is a lie. Don't judge me on saying that. The resurrection of Jesus proves that it's actually a lie. Do you know that the most frequent command in the Bible, what it turns to be? The most frequent command in the Bible. What instruction, what order is given again and again by, everyone there, God, angels, Jesus, prophets, apostles, everyone. One certain single thing been said again and again and again. What is it? Be good, be holy, for I am holy, or don't sin, don't be immoral. No, the most frequent thing or instruction that was mentioned in the scriptures so many times is actually don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, fear not, don't be afraid. It goes on and on and on. The irony of this surprising command, which is a command, don't be afraid, is that even though it's what we want to hear, right? Because we all are powered by fear in our life. It's just hard to obey this command as it's hard to obey all other commands, isn't it? We hold on to fear so tightly that we struggle to let it go. Even we are told to. How many times we were told, don't be afraid, God is in control, trust in God. We say it every time. The student who stressed all terms about exams finishes them, and then the next morning he wakes up with adrenaline rushing, ready to run into the exam room again. The person who's worried for years about money, even then if suddenly inherits some inheritance, and it's more than enough now, still feel anxious when he's passing the bank. It's said that if once a prankster, imagine, sent an anonymous text message to every member of the government that just simply says, everything's been leaked, leave country now. Within 24 hours, they state that all of them had, deactivated their social media, booked flights, and gone completely offline. In fact, all of us, someone said, we overdrawn at the moral bank. All of us. Every one of us has something in their mind, deeply there, in their mind, about which we badly need that voice that is still in our mind to say, don't be afraid. It's going to be all right. Let's make no mistakes about it. Until you learn to live without fear, you won't find it easy to follow Jesus. I'll repeat it again. Until you learn to live without fear, you won't find it easy to follow Jesus. This surprising command bursts into a world where fear feels just normal. We, as I said, powered by fear. We're driven by fear. From the moment we leave that comfortable warmth of mom's womb and meet the cold world, enemy world, we feel being alone, unloved, abandoned. As kids, teens, youth, young adults, we fear looking silly or being left behind in the race of life that no one asked to join. We worry about jobs, afraid we won't get one that actually is so good or as good, or that if we do, we won't be successful at this job. That fear often stays with us for the whole entire life, isn't it? We think about marriage, same thing. Afraid we won't meet the right person. Or if we do, things might fall apart. We worry about this. We consider career changes. We worry about the jumps from job to job. But we're also afraid to miss out if we jump. We look at retirement and fear both getting weaker and dying suddenly. We fear that too. And those are just big fears, right? I'm not talking about small fears that are just constantly going on through our mind every day, 24/7. We are driven by fear. There are many small other fears, that feed off each other. When we try to push fear down or somehow get rid of it, it often shows us again in different ways. It shows up there, like phobias. We have so many mental health problems, especially in this country or in the Western world. Behind all this is actually fear of death. We all are afraid of dying. All of us. There is no exception. Young people might not get it that obvious, but those who passed 50, 60-year-old mark, well, that's the case, isn't it? And that's why they say to us, you're just too young. You are too young to think about death. But death is there. Death is around us. Every single moment, many, many people on earth die. And as we grow older, that fear grows with the age. Isn't it like that? So that's why that surprising command, don't be afraid, is so hard to follow. Even keeping yourself pure seems much easier, right? Jesus said, keep yourself pure because I'm pure, God said, right? It's much, much easier than not to fear, because that's something you can control, or you potentially think you can control. Well, getting older you cannot control. Can you imagine living without fear? Not the boldness of action heroes or thrill seekers, right? That's often just pride or bluff. I mean real, everyday life without that constant worry that things will go wrong. Most people live with that quiet fear at the back of their mind that the world is so unfriendly and just, this next moment the luck might just run out. Into that fearful way of living, for those who accepted Jesus, I'm talking about those specifically who accepted Jesus, and I believe that people are sitting here have accepted Jesus in their life. The gospel comes with both bad and the good news. Guess what it is? The good news, there's only one command this time, not 10. So we got it from 10 down to 1. And the bad news, the command is don't be afraid. And we don't know how to do that. It's actually easier to try to fulfill 10 than that 1. Well, we don't like fear, but we breathe it every day. It's how we learn to live, isn't it? This is also why, many people picture God as someone always giving orders and getting angry. We take our fears and hate, push them onto the sky and call it God. But that's not God. That's just our own fear reflected back at us. When Jesus rises from the dead, and with that comes the surprising command, don't be afraid. Why? Because the God who made the world is also the God who raised Jesus, and now calls you to follow him. Believing in Jesus' resurrection isn't just believing some, facts about his body, or the story about Jesus, or knowing where Jesus went after he died, and where he basically came back, and how he looked like after he was resurrected. No, it's not about that. Those facts don't matter. Don't get me wrong. But they also point to the God who made it happen. God is a central figure in that story, not even Jesus. Believing in this God means trusting that in the end, things will be okay. That kind of trust pushes fear aside, as John said in 1 John 4:18. Perfect love drives out fears. The resurrection shows us that perfect love, God loves us. That's why even if we believe God raised Jesus, it still takes a lifetime for that belief to soak through, to get compacted in our brain, for us to fully receive it, to fully embrace it, to reach our thoughts, our feelings, and the tears we live with every day. Okay, every so often, I'd say somewhere in the middle of your Christian life, Angel, that's still ahead of you, I believe, there will be a sudden crisis. And those who hit that sudden crisis of their Christianity or their faith know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes this process isn't just slow and steady following of Jesus. It involves that sudden crisis. It will be there no matter what you do. There's a part of Paul's story, Apostle Paul, that often gets overlooked. We don't talk about that. We just know about Paul from the book of Acts, but we don't really read his lists properly, right? Because if we did, I believe our church would have looked and thought differently. But that's probably for us more to discover on Paul. I know Peter loves Paul. Thank you, Peter, for preaching about Paul and with Pauline's message in this church. We need more Paul. I know some people like more John or Gospels, but we actually need more Paul because Paul hid it all. He understood it. He lived through it himself. The book of Acts, as I said, doesn't mention that crisis that was there in Paul's life, but Paul talks about it in his second letter to the Corinthians. So while working in the Minor Asia, now it's part of modern-day Turkey, Paul says he went through something so terrible it almost broke him. I was so completely crushed, he writes, that I thought I was going to die. I felt like I'd already been sentenced to death. Much of that letter comes from this painful prison time, as you know. The proud Christian church wanted Paul to look like a strong, successful leader. We all want our leaders to look strong and successful. No one wants to follow a weak leader, right? But Paul had to teach the church that being an apostle and even just being a Christian, it relates to all of us. Doesn't mean looking successful. Hear it again. Being a Christian doesn't mean looking successful. Being a Christian doesn't mean looking successful. It means walking through weakness and failure. While trusting God that can and will raise the dead. That's what following Jesus often looks like. The way Paul describes this experience sounds like depression. And if you read more and more that 2 Corinthians, some parts of it, you will see that Paul actually hit that depression. Depression often starts with, a bunch of fears team up and trap us up, and they go in cycle, right? We worry about one thing, and then we worry about another thing, and then we blame ourselves for one thing, and then we blame ourselves for another thing, and we have fear as a result and something else, and it all goes from start to the round, and again and again and again and again, and you get trapped in that sick loop. Big part of depression is putting ourselves on trial. We get evidences against ourselves. That's all happening in your head, right? I'm sure you went through that at least once in your life. You ignore anything in your favor. You say, I'm guilty, and hand out the punishment. And then you punish yourself. Paul says, I felt like I've been given the death sentence. That's exactly what depression actually looks like. Looking at the clues, it seems Paul's depression came from two things. What are they? First, as you know the story, Paul faced strong opposition in Ephesus. Local people didn't like this new faith and tried hard to make things tough for Paul. He might have managed that alone, but at the same time he was physically worn out. Depression often comes when we are tired or unwell. Keep a mind on yourself. How am I doing? Am I tired or unwell? Then came the second blow. He heard that one of the biggest churches, the Corinthians, had turned on him. They were listening to new teachers who were pulling them away from the gospel that Paul has taught them. So Paul began to wonder, and that's how exactly it's going on every single time you hit that crisis. Had I messed up? Had I failed to teach them well? Had Paul failed them and failed God? Was he going to die in prison, because he wrote it from prison, with his work in ruins? And basically that's when your whole life collapses. He casted all his life onto the weight of spreading the gospel and teaching people. But his whole life was going to ruins because his teaching was going to ruins. Well, this is the kind of fear loop depression state, a cycle that Paul likely went through when he was in his journey around mid-50s AD. But then Paul says something powerful. This crisis forced him to stop relying on himself and to trust the God who raised the dead. Didn't Paul already trust in God? Of course he did. You remember his experience on the road to Damascus, how he was converted. What could be more powerful than that? He already trusted in God. But that was a shock. That mid-crisis of faith was a shock. But even for Paul, it took time for the gospel to sink deeper into every part of who he was. In Asia, it finally hit a deeper level. Paul came to the end of his own strength. He heard the voice of fear saying inside, you are done for. You're never going to recover. It's finished. Forget about it. And that's when he learned again and learned fully on the God, lean on the God who raised the dead. He had been following Jesus for many years, but now he actually really realized and grasped what it meant to follow the one who died and rose again. It meant to stop worrying about his own productivity and to rely on the rushing mighty wind. It meant to stop worrying about his own productivity and rely on the rushing mighty wind. So we shouldn't be shocked if living as Christian brings us to the end of our strength. That's what God's going to do. Where we focus to lean on the God who raises the dead. Living by faith instead of fear feels strange and risky. And it takes time to learn. Slowly, we must open ourselves to this so-called resurrection power. And sometimes that only happens when a sudden crisis hits us. And there's nothing else to hold on to. So don't be surprised if you face, in your journey, in your faith, you face the moment like that. Especially when you feel like the future is totally unclear. Let it be the time when your belief in Jesus and his resurrection will bring you to the point of trusting in God. And your choice to follow the Lamb goes deeper. It's all about reaching the depth of it. Right into the part where you feel no more fear, where that fear hides so you can cast him away. Facing those fears will be scary. But until you've heard that surprising command, don't be afraid, which often comes during that hardest crisis, they may never shift from fear to faith. Crisis is inevitable. But don't be afraid. I hope it's clear now that the true God is nothing like we made him up. The version we often imagine, a grumpy figure in the sky barking out random rules and commandments and say, you must do this, you must do that, right? We're back at the start with the gospel. Either Jesus rose from the dead or he didn't. If he didn't, then the whole faith journey is pointless. We rather need to, eat and drink because tomorrow we will die. What's the point of following Jesus if he didn't rise from the dead? But if Jesus really rose from the dead, there is no need to fear. No need to fear. As the psalm says, the God who saved me from death will also dry my tears and keep me from falling. Psalm 116 and 8. And Jesus shows us this God, this type of God, and calls us deeper inside to follow him. Every other command in life makes sense only in the light of this one. We grab what's not ours because we fear we won't have enough. We misuse sex, not only because of our desire, but because of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of not being loved. We lie because we fear the truth will shame us. And so on and so on. We can continue that list. But when we trust in the God who raised Jesus, our fears are met by his deep, surprising love. That love helps us to go off that false idea of God as a strict boss trying to break our spirit to control us. Instead, we can't follow the real God. We can follow the real God, the one who brings life out of death. This God gives us new, fuller life. He opens us clenched, fearful hands so we can fill them up with his love and life. Last part. If we recognize the truth about surpassing God, the one who raises the dead, we can trust him with everything else in his life, can we? He can be trusted with exams. He can be trusted with jobs. He can be trusted with money. He can be trusted with marriage if the marriage even doesn't turn out what it should be or what you hope it should be. He can be trusted with anything. He can be even trusted with old age. And yes, he can be trusted with death too. Of course, he can. He is the God who raises the dead. Why he cannot be trusted with the death? He is the one who brings life where there seems to be none. When we follow Jesus, who shows us this God, we are walking the same path as Israel at the end of their exile. If you read through the minor prophets and major prophets, book of Isaiah, end of the book of Isaiah, actually, Israel felt like a childless woman, ashamed, alone, rejected in the world where family actually meant everything. Imagine being a woman in the world like that. They were people that were defeated and displaced. The whole integrity and identity had been shaken. And it was to them that this surprising God spoke again, bringing that hope in the voice of the prophets, Nehemiah, Ezra, and all the other minor prophets that followed after the exile. This is the God who raises the dead and calls us to follow his risen Son into new life. As I conclude, growing as a young church kid, I was always told that salvation is actually like a boat with the two paddles, right? One called faith and another called work. And that success belongs to those who actually can row and row tirelessly, row well. About 4,000 years ago, maybe even earlier, but probably not later, people started spreading across the Pacific Ocean from the island we know now as Taiwan. Well, back then it was called Formosa, or maybe not even that yet. These peoples were the ancestors of today's Australians, New Zealanders, people of Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia. You know probably the story well. They went out into the sea in small boats like that, called outrigger canoes. Nothing fancy. And they had with them only harpoon, paddle to steer, and a bit of fresh water. Also, they had their sharp eyes and long stories and songs they remembered by heart. Just think about it. No GPS, no maps, no star charts, no compass, no sextant, no special tools, no thick books, none of that. Even today in places like Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, the traditional sailors still don't use these things. No instruments, no diagrams, not like what Columbus of Magellan or today's sailors use. Just their eyes. Human eyes, no glasses. And that's one thing that actually both Western and Eastern mindset have in common, the pair of eyes. One time, that was many years ago, not that many, but I say many years ago, in Fiji, I was sitting in a canoe like that with an elderly Fijian man. And he said to me, "You Europeans just don't get how it works." "Well, tell me," he said, "what's the first thing you do when you look at the map? Any kind of map. Just think about it. What is the first thing you do when you look at the map? Land or sea?" So the first thing we usually do, people of European or Western culture, is this. We picture ourselves rising above the map. We imagine like we're like a bird, actually, flying in the sky, looking down. And we find that little spot where we are, and we look where we should go, and we try to match and see some other places. On the way to go, we plan the trip. It happens automatically without thinking. And we stay sitting in one place, but in our minds, we fly up. We raise above it, trying to spot where we are and then look for landmarks. And after that, we come back into our bodies. Again, it all happens in our mind. And it happens within a second. We're not even conscious of it. And we then try to match what we saw from above, what's around us, compared with what's around us. That's just how the mind works for people from Western culture. Europeans, Americans, Australians, even the folks in Cape Town. It's the same way of thinking. "That's because you guys are silly," the Fijian said. And he was smiling in that very clever way. "I don't need a watch, compass, or map because I don't fly anywhere. What am I, a bird? You don't know why do you know why I don't try to fly?" he asked. Now close your eyes and imagine this. Maybe that's what we should do now. I am not moving across the ocean in my canoe. The canoe is still. I just sit in it. It's not going anywhere. It's the ocean that moves. The islands and stars above are what's moving. And they've been moving along the same paths for thousands of years. All I do is just sit and wait in my still canoe until the right island passes by. Then I just turn the paddle or a sail. If you really picture that, he said, you'll feel like a bit dizzy. You know, you're sitting in that canoe in the middle of the ocean and the whole world spins around you. The canoe doesn't move. Everything around it does. That small moment, that strange feeling, that's worth remembering. It means that you've touched another culture. And if you're trying to understand another way of life, but you've never feel that shift inside, you haven't really touched that other culture. There is no real connection. Then he said, depending on where I need to go, I call the right islands by singing long old poems to myself in a certain order. Each island has its own song and order. It's not magic. It's how I keep track of time on the trip, because every song has a set length. Thousands of years ago, people from Taiwan started sailing across the Pacific, singing their old ballads. And they did it without even getting out of their small canoes. They went with the wind and against the wind, believing the great ocean moved beneath them. All they had to do is just sit and wait for their stop. They waited. One of the Soviet writers, you obviously don't know who he is, called Viktor Kanetsky, once said, all the wealth of this world we owe to people who knew how to row. Well, that's a good quote, isn't it? But I think there is something even more important than that, even more than rowing. These people knew how to wait. Wait in their small, simple wooden boats. And if you ever read Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea novel, maybe it will help you to understand something else too. One of the most important things in life is actually learning to wait. To wait. Not just for a result, not for something to happen, but see waiting as a way of life. Waiting for the God who raises the dead. Amen.
Surpassing God, which has surpassing love as well. Let's close with the closing song, The Love of God. Let us stand.
skies of parchment lay, where every storm on earth hath quelled, and every one a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above, who drained the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, who stretched from sky to sky. O love of God, how richly pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure the saints and angels' song.
Before we closing with benediction, I just want to remind you, if you want a special prayer, Rebecca and Stephanie will be ready just behind and next to the sound desk to pray with you.
Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors. Do not turn me over to the desire of my foes, for false witnesses rise up against me, spouting malicious accusations. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Let's pray. Lord, it's so common in this world to live by fear, not just because it's the natural way the life goes. We see the end. And when we see the end, we fear. And everything grows out of that, Lord. Let us learn that there is nothing to fear, because if Christ was raised from the dead, then we all who take upon his name will be raised too. Let us wait for you. Let us learn for this style of living, which is waiting for the Lord. And let us be thankful for everything that comes along our way, Lord. Please guide us and bless us as we want to follow you wherever you go. Amen.